Wow, it is intimidating up here. My name's Evan Fraser, and I work at the University of Guelph. And if you please, I would like you all to imagine standing in a large parking lot on a hot summer day. The sun's beating down at about 40 degrees Celsius. The location of this scene could be anywhere, but the one I'm thinking of, the parking lot I have going in my head, is somewhere in the American Midwest, and the time was a few years ago. The occasion of this parking lot was an agricultural field trip that I was accompanying with a group of undergraduate students from the University of Guelph. It was dry, bone dry. And on one side of the parking lot, there were 3 huge open-topped storage facilities, each filled with grain. Each one was about 150 meters long, dozens of meters wide, and 5 meters deep. Bigger than this room, significantly bigger than this room. Now I'd like you to imagine standing next to a digger, a front-end loader. It dwarfs over you. You don't even come up to the wheel well. And as it drives away into these storage facilities, it gets smaller and smaller, dwarfed by the volume of these grain bins. Now on the other side of the parking lot are large enclosures where 200 black and white cows eat the grain that comes to them from those bins. And surrounding this farm are thousands of hectares, significantly more than Pippi Park, of irrigated pastures, where another 2,000 cows, those that aren't lactating, graze on the lush fields. And then surrounding this are the non-irrigated or natural fields, dry, scrubby, supporting only a small number of individual beef cows. At the very epicenter of this farm I'm describing to you is the Milking Parlor, where every 12 minutes, 12 cows arrive, 23 hours a day. This is a scene that's typical of dairy across North America, especially the US. In Canada, the dairy sizes are only about 1/10 of what I'm describing to you here, but this is typical of an American farm, and even in Canada too, our dairy farms are growing. What you have to realize is that this kind of intensive dairy is extremely thirsty business. Each of these cows produces about 30 liters of milk every day. So you have to imagine 30 1-liter cartons of milk being filled each and every day. That means that 6,000 cartons of milk are coming out of this dairy, 60,000 cartons of milk are coming out of this dairy each and every day. And since milk takes 4.5 liters of water to produce 1 liter of milk, you would need something in the order of 250,000 liters of water each and every day for this single farm. So the nice folks that organized tonight's event asked me to try to make sense of these statistics. But I'm really struggling. I think, if I've got my conversions right, that these cows on this one farm would drain an Olympic swimming pool every 10 days. Now, as it happens, this particular farm was in a semi-arid part of the American Midwest, and we were visiting during a drought. Consequently, it was hardly surprising when one of our brighter students put his hands up and said the obvious question to the manager: "Do you have enough water?" The answer came quickly. "Yes," the dairy manager responded. "Water in the state is allocated based on permits. Permits are allocated based on how many hectares of land you've got under cultivation. So to get enough permits for this size of operation, I had to lease some extra land. Having now leased the land, I have tons of water." This answer was delivered authoritatively, and the students seemed satisfied. But as we were leaving the farm, the students started asking questions and very quickly did a little bit of web research. What they discovered is fascinating, I think. So now I'd like you to imagine that you're sitting on a satellite 100 miles above North America, and you're looking down. The Rocky Mountains are on the left, the Mississippi River is on the right, and between the two is a gradient of grays, browns, and into greens as the arid conditions on the rain shadow of the mountains give way to the moist Mississippi. I'd now like you to imagine that not only you are on this satellite, but you'll also have X-ray vision, and you're able to peer down deep, deep, deep into the earth, into the water table, and see what's going on underneath the surface. Doing this, you would discover that underlying much of this area is a vast underground reservoir of water, most of which was left to us by the retreating glaciers 10,000 years ago. This aquifer, which is called the Ogallala, is the lifeblood of America's food system, North America's food system. Unfortunately, it's running out. The area of the aquifer on which the farm I've just described sits lost, according to the US government, over 40 feet of depth between 1980 and in the mid-1990s. That's the height of this room of declining water table. A more recent assessment suggests that 35% of the area will not be able to sustain irrigation beyond the next generation. And as it happens yesterday, and this is just a bizarre statement about the nature of jet travel, I was in a meeting in Mexico City where I met with a university professor from the University of Kansas, and he said that there are 2 counties in Kansas, not far from the farm I'm describing, that have gone dry this year and are no longer able to support irrigation. So we have a conflict which will resonate with many of you, between the resource users' perception of abundance, the policymakers' perception of abundance, and the realities of a dwindling, declining resource. And what's going on in the American Midwest is actually being repeated around the world. We have recurring droughts in California and China affecting millions. 60 million people in South Asia depend on water melting off of glaciers and the snowpack in the Tibetan Plateau in the adjacent mountain ranges. All of these people, especially under climate change, are vulnerable to water scarcity. So one of the recurring themes of the 21st century is that we are running out. Nevertheless, we persist under the illusion of abundance. The core question remains, though, what on earth can we do about this situation? Luckily, there actually are many solutions. What I want to do now is briefly describe 3 of the more technically oriented solutions, but we can, after over drinks, describe a range of other solutions. For instance, let's think about plant genetics. Around the world, plant breeders, geneticists, are working to create more drought-tolerant crops. In particular, many scientists are working with what's called carbon-4 or C4 photosynthesizers. These are plants that have an extra carbon molecule that allows them to continue growing even under very hot, dry conditions. Many plants, however, most plants, don't have this extra carbon molecule. For instance, rice and wheat are carbon-3 photosynthesizers. These kind of plants become much more easily stressed under low moisture. So work is underway to breed crops that have this extra carbon molecule that would make them less vulnerable to drought. Now, many people think such genetic approaches show great promise. Many, however, are extremely skeptical. And so a second approach is being explored that will allow farmers to use less water while producing lots of crops. In the future, smart irrigation systems will be linked with detailed soil maps, satellite imagery, in order to ensure that the right amount of water is applied to the right plant at the right time. These technologies often go under the banner of precision agriculture and represent the marriage of soil sensors, moisture probes, satellite imagery, and big data analytics. Again, these sort of high technology approaches show a lot of promise, but some are skeptical. So a third broad strategy that farmers can adapt to reduce their vulnerability to drought is called Agro Ecology. An agroecological farmer would use a mixture of crops and lots of manure to build up the organic matter in the soil. And this is important because organic matter acts like a sponge, trapping moisture when it's abundant and saving it for when it's needed. Between these 3 approaches and many others that we simply don't have time to go into tonight, my own feeling is that all of these, the portfolio of these approaches, will be needed depending on where in the world you are. Between these approaches, I believe we can create a global agri-food system that 1, requires much less water, 2, is much more productive under low moisture conditions, and 3, is even able to remain productive as the weather becomes unstable. But my final message is that this sort of thing will only be possible if we get the policy signals right. In other words, and returning to that dairy and that hot summer day in that parking lot, we need to make sure that the policymakers and the resource users, the consumers, are not working under the illusion that water is abundant when in fact it's becoming scarce. Thank you very much.